Hello. Thank you for joining me on Lift, Run, Repeat. My name is Jason Berg. Today, I'm going to be telling you about the 3 most important attributes you should be training for when you are programming your workouts for an obstacle course race. There are 3 primary areas of concern that you should be focused on in your programming: cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength, primarily in the upper body, and short bursts of power. For me personally, in my own opinion and experience, I think cardiovascular endurance is probably the most important one that a beginner should focus on, which is kind of what this video series is geared towards, someone doing their very first one. The reason being, if you're extremely tired and your cardiovascular endurance is very poor, being strong enough to carry yourself across a monkey bar or up over a wooden wall is going to be pretty irrelevant. You're going to be gassed, so it's not really necessary. And then secondarily, if your muscular strength is poor in the legs or your low back area, upper body is weak, being able to generate the type of power necessary to burst up the warped wall on the Everest obstacle at Tough Mudder, for example, is not going to help you. If you don't have good muscular strength to begin with, you're not going to have the ability to generate the power necessary to make that sprint. So in order of importance for me, it goes kind of as listed: cardiovascular endurance, muscular strength, and then the power. So your programming should orient first towards that cardiovascular endurance base and building that base. And that's going to depend on the length of the event that you might be doing. So for, say, a Tough Mudder 5K or a Spartan Sprint, those are pretty short. So your endurance capacity really only needs to be, 3 or 4 miles. If you're doing the Tough Mudder Classic, like I'm doing, which is generally kind of somewhere around, 9-10 miles-ish, then for me, that's where my cardiovascular base is going to need to be. I'm going to need to be able to be comfortable running or traveling, 8 to 10 miles and still have the capacity inside to, pull myself up over an obstacle or burst, up a warped wall or what have you. So I think for most folks, if you decide you're going to do an obstacle course race, you're going to want to start, 10 to 12 weeks out. This also is kind of explained before in some of the earlier videos where I show exercises and things that you might want to incorporate. This presupposes that you possess a general level of fitness capacity. If you're extremely deconditioned, overweight, if you have a lot of orthopedic injuries, knee, back, spinal stuff, shoulder reconstructions, things like that, I wouldn't recommend that you start that late. If that's what you want to do, and I think that's great. I did it after knee reconstruction, but I had to start almost a year. This is after I've done all my rehab and all the reconstructive procedures. If you are at a reasonable level of fitness already, then 10 to 12 weeks out would be pretty appropriate. You could probably get away with that. Obviously, more training is always better, but 10 to 12 week plan is pretty good. So for cardiovascular fitness, you'd start, like for the Tough Mudder Classic, let's say, the first 4 weeks, you'd want to be comfortable getting out at least 3 times a week, and you'd want to be doing, kind of averaging, 4 to 5 miles per run. And then by the end of that month, your long day runs should be at least 6 miles. The second 4 weeks, so weeks 5 to 8, your average there is going to be closer to 5 to 7 miles per average. Your long day, being more like 8. And then in the final, 2 to 4 weeks, week 10, you want to have that be your longest day, to give yourself a couple weeks of kind of tapering down. And that you'd want to have that be your longest day, and that'd want to be closest to your race distance. In my case, I'd want to make sure that I'm hitting at least 9 miles for sure, 10 if I can. and then averaging, somewhere again around 6-7 miles per outing. So that way I've got a real solid cardiovascular base to build off of. There's tons of training programs out there, and you can search for those. There's a million of those out there, so I'm not going to get too much into the weeds of that. So in terms of strength development, the primary concern is going to be in the upper body. Most of the obstacles which aren't just the gross get in the mud, crawl around ones. Most of the obstacles that require some level of strength demand that from the upper body. So you're pulling yourself up over a wooden wall, or an inverted one. You're traversing across an inclined monkey bar. You are pulling yourself up out of the muddy ditches. You're running up the warped wall and grabbing onto the ledge to pull yourself up, or maybe you're grabbing onto a large human being who's reaching down to grab you, which is my strategy. But you're pulling, so pulling is going to be the primary strength component. So all of your resistance training programming is going to need to be geared around that. Essentially, your best lift options here are going to be things that are going to develop grip strength and activation through the posterior chain, which are all the muscles running along the back side of the body and down into the legs, hamstrings, calves. So the stabilizer functions in the low back, all of that stuff's what you're going to need to be developing. So any type of deadlifting that you're going to do, and deadlifting variants are things that are going to be good. So whether it's strict deadlifting off the floor, or stiff-legged Romanians, or rack pulls, or kettlebell swings, all of those are hip hinge deadlifting type patterns. So those are always going to be great. You're going to build good grip strength, and you're always going to be activating those stabilizer functions in the low back and the core, which is always a good thing. On top of that, any other kind of row type motion, so whether it's upright rows, straight on a cable, and then you just vary those angles until you're doing things like lat pull downs perhaps, or working on strict pull-ups, chin-ups, anything developing those skills is always going to be good. And in my other videos that, I show how to do that without any equipment, just out in a park. It's important though to not fall asleep on your legs and leg strength. So squatting and lunging in multiple directions, those are always going to be good exercises too. General strength development is going to be important and beneficial. So it could be something like I think it's called a fireman carry, where somebody gets on your back and you have to carry them. That's lower body strength. Seattle course usually has a big hill climb that you have to hike up. The last on the list is going to be developing short bursts of power. You're not going to need to develop an extensive power training dynamic program for that. You're just going to want to make sure that you're incorporating some instances of short burst power development in your training program. The real key is doing those types of exercises when you're tired. So the real key to completing the course as effectively and as efficiently and as successfully as possible is for you to be comfortable sprinting 20 yards after you've already run 6 miles and done 15 other obstacles up to that point. Not only do you want your system capable of drawing on that energy requirement, you also want the tissues in your muscles to be comfortable with that demand that you're placing on them. So there you go. Those are the 3 most important attributes for developing a training plan for an obstacle course race. Thank you very much for watching. Again, my name is Jason Berg. I appreciate you. This is Lift, Run, Repeat. Come back next week and I'll have more advanced exercises, more difficult exercises to tack on to your training program when you're running out in the world, doing the playground style workout that I've been showing last several weeks. So tune in for that next week. Again, I really appreciate you watching. Hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next week. Thanks.